Hey everybody, welcome to a video of doing a full X21 Type M install on this Suzuki GN400 bobber. So you can see it here in its final form, but as we get going you can see the condition of the harness, kind of how it's laid out, and just kind of how overly complex and bulky it was, but that was the technology we had at the time. Now the mission or the goal here is to eliminate it completely. I have not used a single wire off of this harness. I have removed it completely. But in some instances, it is easier to actually disassemble the stock harness and maybe remove your ignition setup, just because it might have like a lot of plugs to it or something like that, and it's just easier to remove those completely from the harness instead of trying to remake that from scratch with new plugs and terminals and such. But understand that the mission here is to not use any of the original harnesses. You're building one completely new in a minimized form. It's going to be a lot cleaner, a lot simpler to work with. And you guys will see by the end how straightforward it really is. Now, just know a lot of my customers are novice builders. They've never done anything like this before. And with asking the right questions, with having the right information in front of them, they can do it, and so can you. So just know that if you guys get overwhelmed, that's totally normal. You can step away, come back to it. Just do whatever you got to do to get it done. And again, ask questions. I'm here for you guys, and so is NWT and Al of Kilt Bushido Builds. We have your back, so we'll get you going in time. Just be patient. But anyway, I know this is a long video, and you can see in the bottom here it's broken up into chapters, and that's hopefully to allow you guys to kind of jump around from section to section on the corresponding video segment that's going to help you the most. So I know it's a long one, and I'll let you guys get to it, but here you go, X21 install. So to get started, let me kind of talk you through some of the components and a breakdown of how the system will operate, and then we will start wiring it from there. So on the table here, we have all of the various components that we're going to be installing on the bike. And we have to break this down into a few different systems. So we have our ignition system, so this is the CDI for it, and most of this just plugs straight into the engine. So there's minimal wiring here, maybe a power and a ground, one to go into the coil. Very simple on this side. We have our ignition switch here, so obviously we just run power in and then we get power back out. We have our charging system over here, so I'm going to convert this bike to a more modern regulator rectifier, all self-contained. This one's a two-phase, so something perfect for this style bike where it doesn't have a full-blown three-phase alternator. And of course we have our battery. This is a lithium ferrophosphate battery that we offer with built-in battery management system. Pretty cool unit. And of course we have the X21 Type M, so this is going to control all of our lighting, all of our extremities, things like that. And that is all controlled with these two small buttons. So we're going to have one on the right and one on the left, and this is going to be activating like if you had a starter on the bike, but your turn signals, your ignition on, off, headlight high, low, that kind of thing. All very clean. These flush mount on the bar, and then you run the wires internally, again, for that super clean look. And then over here we have our turn signals that we're going to mount up, and this is going to be what I start with. So I will go ahead and start getting lume on these things and then running everything from the extremities inward. You can do that vice versa, it doesn't matter. This is just how I'm going to do it on this bike. So let's get to it. Now looking at the bike, obviously we have a blank canvas here, and let me tell you, the hardest part about this whole process is just getting started. So try not to overthink it, just pick something and get started with it, and it will just start rolling from there. It can seem like a daunting task, but trust me, we're going to make this as easy as possible, and you have the support should you need it. So just be sure you reference all of your information, take your time, be methodical, and it will turn out okay, alright? So with that being said, I'm going to get started on it. Alright, quick tip. For areas like this that aren't an exact circle, you need a little bit of protection from the edge here. So what I do is I take a little bit of fuel line, give it a cut right down one side of it, and then you carefully kind of feed it in here, and you have a custom fit grommet that's going to protect your wiring. Okay, so you just saw me install the switch, and you notice that the bend going from the ignition switch itself into the tray is very tight. Now you want to try to relieve as much strain as you can on the wiring. So what I'm going to do here, take my heat gun, put some heat on that bend right there. That's going to actually relax the wires and make them form into the shape of that bend, and they'll stay that way. And that way there's no strain on them. And this is how you kind of go about getting some of these tight angles. You put a little heat on it, relax things into the shape you want them. Now you might have noticed the yellow heat shrink here and the green heat shrink here. That is because per the NWT wire color code, yellow is the left turn signal and green is the right. So because I'm going to be tying these together inside the bucket, I'm going to make this easier for me to know which side is which. So that's why I just put a little piece of heat shrink on there as a instant visual reminder. And of course, this is not something you have to do, but it helps. All right, next up, since we just got the turn signals on here, I'm going to start running my headlight wiring. Now, the install guide here does go through and has some suggestions as far as what gauge wiring to follow. Now, for this particular bike, we're using an incandescent or filament style bulb, and we're going to be using or consuming a little bit more amperage than maybe an LED. So I'm going to keep it at 16 gauge because that's just commonly what I use and that's what I have the most of. But you can use 18 gauge for this combination, and if it was LED, you could go even smaller. But as mentioned, that information is right here in your install manual. So for now, I'm going to draw some blue, white, and black, and we will get it ran. Okay, right here I have my headlight wiring, so I'm going to get it loosely routed along its designated path. And this actually goes in through the top grommet here on the headlight. Leave yourself a little bit extra to work with. It's going to look a lot worse before it gets better. It'll be all right. Alright, well, I'm waiting on my soldering iron to heat up because I'm going to fix the existing taillight that was on the bike. So while I'm doing that, I'm going to grab my new taillight wiring. So again, going by the code, we have brown and we have red. This one we don't need a whole lot because the distance is very short. That is plenty. And on this one I'm going to step it up to a 16 gauge ground because I'm going to tie it into the actual turn signal ground just for a little added safety. Alright, I have re-loomed all of this. I went ahead and resoldered the connection for the taillight. So new wires. I have my heat shrink, which I'm not going to do anything with right now, but I'll get this routed, installed for good. But we'll come back later after we figure out the exact length we need for stuff. This will run under here and tie in everything else. Alright, so I'm going to work on finishing up the headlight bucket here. And I have these two small black wires. These are the turn signal grounds. I have combined those two. And then this is the main headlight ground. And what we're going to do is solder that to the green side on this. This is kind of universal. So white on the headlight bucket is typically the low beam. And then you have a blue, which just fell down there. That is going to be your high beam, and then the green is going to be ground. So if you're working on a Honda and you have a factory wiring color, green is typically ground, but in the NWT world right now, we're just going to stick with black being ground, so we just have to remember that for the rest of the bike. So we've already done the high beam, and we've already done the grounds for this, so now I'm just going to work on the low beam, and then I'll get to the turn signals. So every harness I've done has always been a little bit different than the last. I'm always trying new things and just taking different approaches to stuff. So this one, I'm trying to use less connectors in it. On one hand, just to kind of save time, and then the other just to kind of just see how clean I can do it. So this one, like in this same spot, would normally be a place where I would put like bullet connectors or something like that. That's definitely an option for you guys, but keep that in mind. Just trying new things, so yeah, in the sake of experimentation. Alright, so our headlight wiring is done here, and then we have our turn signals wired in. Now I tried to leave a little extra length. Let's say there was an issue down the road or something and you had to remove one of these. You're gonna have to cut it and then solder it back, so we have extra length. For now, all we have running the headlight bucket is 5 wires, so we're simplifying stuff already, just being that we're tying the grounds in, and we just have to have one ground running up, and it makes it easier. So I'm going to put a piece of heat shrink all the way down this this section, and then we'll be ready to add our loom a little bit later down the road. Now I'm just partially shrinking that down because, again, we're going to put loom on this. I'm going to tuck it inside here. And you will notice me using a lot of different heat shrink. And I explained some of the components that I use and the reasons behind it in another video. Some wiring tips and tricks. But I'll link that above. If you haven't seen that, definitely go check it out. I go over heat shrink and different connectors and things like that, different wire tools, all kinds of stuff. Okay, now that I have most of the extremities ran, you know, we have a lot of the stuff going to the front. We have our taillight harness, our turn signal wiring. I am going to work on permanently mounting the actual CDI unit, our regulator, rectifier, and of course the X21. So for this one, I'm just going to use the supplied adhesive pad. We'll stick that down. And then on these two, I'm going to actually drill through the pan, and we'll mount it with some attractive screws. And then on one of these posts, probably the right side here, I'm going to use that as kind of my main chassis ground right now. I'll have a runner that goes to the eventual battery, but this is going to be where I tie in a lot of the initial grounds on here. So for now, I'm going to kind of mark out where everything needs to go. We'll start getting everything kind of in place permanently. So this is going to be one of my main ground points, and to do this I've obviously cleared off some paint here. I have a pedestal that this is going to sit on, and I've gone and machined the end of this so it's actually like just raw steel, so that will make contact there. And then on the bottom I'm going to use a serrated washer, and that's going to help keep contact on the bottom. So I'll end up taking a little paint off right here and right there, of course, and that will be a good point for us to start making contact. Now right now I'm using just some regular kind of like whiz nuts, but I'll use nylox whenever I go to permanently do this, because I'll end up taking this stuff out to like run wires underneath and whatnot. So this is good for mock-up. Now to mount the X21 you have a couple options here, both of which are covered with the supplied hardware. So the way I'm going to go about this is just with a basic adhesive pad. That's typically how I like to do it. And I'm already breaking core rules for myself here and drilling holes in my trays for the regular rectifier and stuff, but this, depending on your location, these do include special hardware just for the X21, and that is for you to actually drill and screw the unit down itself, but it's very important that you do not over tighten them. This is just a 3D printed case. It doesn't need to be any more resilient than that, so just don't go cranking down on the screws though, and you'll be just fine. But for now, I'm going to kind of clean off this area, use some denatured alcohol, get the pad on here, mount it down, and then I'll start routing wires. Now the orientation of this obviously does not matter. This all comes down to how you're going to route your wires. So I'm going to have a lot of my outputs just kind of ran in through this side, and that makes sense for me to mount it in this orientation. Use the calibrated eyeball. That's where it's going to sit. And it just makes sense with how the wires are going to be routed. So our main power in is going to come from our key, so that's going to be on this side anyway. We'll have a couple handlebar controls that'll come through here, and that can route up towards the front. And then outputs, we have stuff coming from the rear, and then a lot of wires that'll come over here. So it just makes sense. All right, just made a quick decision. I flipped the rec around, and that's going to give me an opportunity to route some wires over here and get any potential connections taken care of out of the way. So this is a continually evolving thing. There's no exact right way, exact wrong way, just kind of whatever feels good, whatever's going to work best for the flow. Alright, now continuing on, I want to work on cleaning up the ignition side here, or the power distribution side. So let me kind of explain what's going to be going on. On our ignition switch, we have one big red wire. That is going to be power into the actual switch. So this is going to come from battery power. Now what we want to do is have an inline fuse on that circuit, because we don't have a starter solenoid on here which has a built-in main fuse. So we're going to put this inline fuse. So that is going to go about right here. Big red wire, we'll tap into that. This will end up going back out and go down to the battery, which will eventually place down there. And then whenever the key is in the on position, it will send power out through these two red wires. Now we're going to tie these together, and that is going to be our main power in for the X21 system. So that'll go right there. The second screw terminal here, that's going to go out to ground. Now also on our ignition switch, we have three other wires. We have a black with white, a black, and a yellow with red. Now the black and black with white, this is going to be something I take advantage of for this bike because it's CDI. These two wires have continuity when the key is in the off position. So what that means is I'm going to tie that into the ground side, and that's going to be part of my negative shutdown, because a CDI bike shuts down a little bit different than like a different type of ignition system. The yellow with red wire, this is actually for the park feature, so when the key is in park, this will have power, and this you can send power to like your taillight circuit. Alright, so I just put a quick piece of Nymex over this section here. These wires are going to run in this direction. These two power wires, as I've explained, are going to go to this pin on the X21. This will be the main power. So I'm going to tie these together, and then for these two ports, the X21 of course comes with the correct terminal. So this will fit in here really nicely. And I'm going to actually remove the coating on this, and then I will tie these together, do my own kind of crimp, and then heat shrink it accordingly. But you can just crimp these on and it will be just fine. So that's what I'm going to do and get this in place. Now, a thing of note whenever you're doing this, especially running any of your power circuits, do not have any kind of actual power hooked up, so remove the battery altogether. The most common issue that we see, or the most common mistake that we see made, is that people are trying to wire these things with live wires on the bike, and it's easy to cause a short on something, and then you're just chasing your tail down the road. So just disconnect all power, remove the battery altogether if you can, and that way no accidents can happen. So just take your time, be methodical again. Alright, the ignition switch is done. So you can see here we have our two red wires that taps into our X21 power. Over here the loom continues. This larger gauge red wire goes to our main fuse. This is going to be fed from the battery, and this is what goes back in to the ignition switch and then back out, obviously. Right here we have our park position. So this one I just left kind of open. I'm not going to use it, so I just put a female bullet connector on here, and this can just kind of dangle and not cause any problems. The black with white, that's going straight to ground here, and this is going to be our negative shutdown for the CDI. So the other end of that in the off position is the black wire, and that's going to tap straight into the black wire here on the CDI itself. Okay, let's say you're doing the install here, and you come to a situation where you just want to either test a circuit or confirm maybe how something's pinned or you might not have a diagram. So this is one of those moments where a digital multimeter is invaluable. So let's test the ignition switch, for example. Let's make sure we're getting power where it needs to go. So there's no power on the bike, but I have this thing set to continuity. Beeps whenever you have contact, right? So with the ignition switch, we know that this is going to be the power into the switch, and then our power back out is going right here to the X21. So let's make sure that circuit works. So key in. I'm going to put one probe on the X21 where the ignition output should be, the other side on the fuse, and right now there's no continuity. Flick the key and you hear the beep. So that's continuity. Then we go to the park side and it's off. Alright, so we know that works perfect. Now, we can also test our park feature. So we know this yellow with red wire is going to be on the park circuit, so same kind of test. Again, power into the switch. So those two are hooked up, we have no continuity. Key is off, key on, still nothing. There's park. Back to on, and there's no continuity, and off. So with this switch, you can go to park and remove the key. So this would be one of those circuits where you could put some diodes in the system and run like just your tail lights or something, or if you wanted to do like that kind of like underglow or whatever that you know is popular, that would be the circuit you would tie into there. But this is the safe way to test your circuits and your power. And like I said, if you don't know, like let's say you don't have a diagram for something, you can test all the pinouts, and that's how you figure out exactly what has contact in what position. So just a quick tip for you guys. Alright, I'm going to go and wire up the rest of the CDI unit. So just a quick explanation here of how this system works. Up here we have our charge coil, we have our white with blue stripe and our pink. That's these two wires right here. And this is our two-phase charging system. So this goes to the regulator rectifier as shown in my diagram. Now, traditionally, in a lot of other bikes, you'll have a three-phase charging system, but this one's magneto. This one's kind of, originally a 6-volt, so kind of low power, but this is still going to be fine for our application. The rest of these are basically low-speed and high-speed pickup for the timing signal. So these just plug straight into the CDI, and we're good to go. So once we mount this back up, all we got to do is kind of re-terminate these because I can't fit them through my grommets, and then come up with a cool, clean solution for all the wires. So once we plug it all back in, that'll be it for this section, and the charging system along with the ignition system will be pretty much complete. Well, now I have the CDI wiring complete, so I have my 5 inputs here. This is going straight to the CDI unit here. Then this section here, this is actually going to my regulator rectifier. So the red wire is going to be our power output to the battery. That'll be down low. And then these two other wires, the yellow and the pink, these are the AC generator wires from the actual magneto. So those are sending AC power to the reg rec, and then it's outputting through that red wire. The green wire that's on here, just running straight to ground. But that side is done, and now I'm going to start running the rest of the stuff into here and making it look kind of clean. This is the fun part. So for now, I've got my headlight and front turn signal harness. I've got my loom on here, and I still need to just run it through here. We'll figure out where to terminate this. We'll put some heat shrink on it, and then we'll be able to cut for our last little bit there. That's actually ending at the perfect length. Pleased with that. Alright, I went ahead and just trimmed the ground wire, so this is going to have plenty of length, so we'll cut this back a little bit more as we finish it. And then these, they're only going to the outputs right here. So we'll kind of fan these out. We'll cut them about right here just to give us a little bit less extra length to play around with here, and then we'll finalize it here as we go. Once we do the final output install. So looking a lot better. It's hard to picture at first, but you just try to visualize exactly how everything's going to flow as you know before you get going, and then as you go you evolve that. So I think it's going to work though. Now I still have to put in a couple outputs, like for your gauges, your dummy lights, that kind of thing. There's also a couple more inputs for my brake switch, neutral light, and those are going to take up a little bit of space, and then of course the buttons on the bars. Now luckily on this bike, being the Type M, there's 2 wires for each side, and that's really simple. So all we got to do is run basically 4 tiny little wires and we're good to go. So when installing an X21, we're going to have a neutral safety, and that is for 2 reasons. One is to power the dummy light that you might have up there, and the other is to be integrated into the starter circuit. So on these Suzukis, they have a little bit of a unique system, which is kind of cool. They actually have an individual gear indicator. So this operates off of a little cam. So might look a little daunting. It's just got a bundle of wires going up. And normally this would operate the gauges up top, and it would have an actual digital readout for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever gear you're in, along with neutral. But we're going to bypass a lot of that on this bike. So I've removed it from here, and you can see that little detent, that little ball right there. So we need to figure out where neutral is. Let me show you. Now if you remember that detent ball, what that does is it makes contact on each of these points here. So you have this little one, we have to assume that's neutral. So if you click down, so 1 down, 4 up, and this particular sensor, they probably have it in use on multiple Suzukis that are like, say, a 6-speed, so that's why like this particular one, there's no mark on it. But we can test this and confirm by using a continuity tester. So we get out our multimeter. You guys know I like this thing. We have it set on continuity, and what we're looking for is the correct wire that corresponds with our neutral on here. So I'm going to put 1 terminal on the neutral side, and we would start pinning out each of these wires, but pretty confident that it's this one. So let's check it out. So that's continuity on neutral to the blue, and we can reconfirm that. Let's put this in, let's say, first gear up here, and then we can start pinning these. Alright, so there's first, no continuity on the rest of them. Go to second, there's second. So it goes all the way around, so just as you would expect, and that's how we figured it out. Now in premise, this works by basically providing continuity to ground, which is the engine, which is what you want. So this is not going to have any power running through it, but rather just the ground side of the switch. Alright, so I just grabbed some 14 gauge wire for our main power in to the ignition switch. Now you gotta remember we got some 16 gauge wire coming out, so I'm using 1 single 14. That should be plenty enough to power this bike. So again, using this inline fuse holder here, just strip a little bit back, put that on there, then we're going to fan this out. Feed that in there the best we can. These things are cool. I'm glad I bought these. That's clean. And then this one just gets a nice comfortable bend in it. And then this one we're going to follow down along the same path. as my horn output because these are going to essentially the same spot. And then I'll also tie in my neutral light, so my neutral signal, that's probably going to come up, and I think I'll just have that running around and going back into this side of the X21, and that should button up that. Okay, next up I'm going to work on getting the coil wired, and that is going to be powered from this black with yellow wire coming from the CDI. I'd already put a bullet connector on here, so we're just going to run a single wire up the frame, and then that's just going to join in right here. We'll put another bullet, so actually we'll have two females in this one. But this is a 3.9 size, and the one I used over here is a 3.5, just to keep it kind of differentiated. So this one, there's basically two different sizes of bullet connectors. This is a 3.5, I use these a lot, and then the 3.9 is a larger diameter, so there's actually no way this would fit. So just keep that in mind. Typically it's a color thing. You can see the brass versus kind of like plated. So just another little quick tidbit there. And then also I've taken the X21. I typically just throw a piece of tape on here and then I write out what the outputs are. That way whenever you start routing stuff you can kind of get a better idea of exactly the length you need when you get down to the specifics. So we'll be utilizing this here very soon. But for now I'm going to run one more wire. We'll cover it in Nymex. Run along there, and that'll be one more circuit done. So this main ground for the X21, I'm going to just tie in to one ring terminal with the headlight and front turn signal ground. So it doesn't really matter, but I'm just trying to save space on that stud right there. But we'll tie those together on one ring terminal and it will be installed. Alright, now this is looking really good. Checking out right here, we have some outputs. This is for the headlight harness, the headlight and front turn signals. Back here, tail light and turn signals, and then we also have the gray wire which is buried under here, but that is for the horn. So those are all on the output side, and then on the ignition side we have down here this black wire that runs to the CDI as we've mentioned, so that ties in right there, and that's going to be on our negative shutdown. So what we do, as a review, there's a little switch down there, it's hard to see, but we flick that, so it's a negative shutdown, and that is going to be correct for this CDI. So what I'm going to do is start doing the final routing for the output side. So we'll strip back and solder the tips, insert these in here. That will start looking good. But to review, kind of show you guys where we're at with the book. Now, this is the install manual. Of course, we had everything mounted where we needed to go. And then from there we started working on maybe some power distribution. So we're not using a solenoid on this bike, so we're running stuff from, like, let's say battery to key, so on and so forth. So we went through that. And then on the ignition side, you know, magneto here. So we have our negative shutdown. Even says it right here. Engine power select to the right. And we've gone through here, we've routed all of our lighting and everything is pretty much ran to the X21. We just have to do those final connections as I've mentioned. And then lastly, what we're going to be doing is working on our final inputs, like our rear brake switch and neutral switch. This bike does not have an oil pressure light, so we're not going to be using that. And then we're not using any gauges at the moment. I'm probably going to put some dummy lights on this thing, but the last of what we have to install is this little sub harness here. So this is going to be for our brake switch and neutral light. So we'll get rid of one wire there. This one is dash output, we're not using. And then of course the last two things are just the two buttons, which is just going to be drilling the bars, routing these to the unit, plugging them in. Now, a good tip, depending on how the solder comes out, is to kind of make it a little bit more flat. That helps with getting it in and out of here. And then finally, don't over tighten the screws. Snug it down and you're good to go. Just make sure you have good routing with strain relief. Nothing's pulling on it, so everything's kind of in a neutral position, and make it look good. So now we have all of our outputs done. We have nothing on these two slots here because that would be for our starter solenoid, which of course we're not using. But now, plug that in. That will live there. We just need to put a little piece of loom on these two wires here, and that whole output side is done. Alright, now that we've finished all of the outputs, we can work on this last little section of input. This is going to attach right here on the X21. So I've mentioned that we're going to have our brake switch, which is the black and orange. The gray wire, that's going to be your neutral switch. And then purple is oil pressure, but since we don't have that, we're just going to remove this wire altogether. And the way you do that, there's these little tiny tangs in here. So I'm just going to press down and pull back. Just like that. You can see there's that little release tab on the top. That's what we're pushing down on. But you just want to make sure that that is extended out a little bit, and you can reinsert this and it's still good to go. But since we don't need it, I'm just removing it fully. So, deleted. Less wires. Alright, now on to one of the final pieces of the puzzle is getting the battery mounted. So I made a custom tray here, but I'm going to work on getting these two wires hooked up. If you remember, one is going to the ignition switch and one is coming from the regulator rectifier. So those are obviously going to go to the power side. But before we start making those connections and mocking it up, you want to make sure that your main fuse is out. So I've done that. And then I took it a step further and I've disconnected the power and ground from the actual X21, so we do not have to worry about any potential damage here. So don't, you just want to make sure there's no power on the system as you're mocking everything up. And done. So of course, you would have larger lugs on here if we had electric start, but because we don't, we only need some smaller gauge stuff. So that's why this is the way it is. Okay, now before I button everything up, I have my last ground wire ran in through back there, runs all the way along here, and then loops around this tight bend right here and runs to the base of my main ground point. And then I'm using that to kind of hold down this section of harness, and then this goes over it, so you know it's going to be all nice and clean. But probably going to put a slightly longer bolt in here now just because we have so many on here. But other than that, that concludes all of the wiring except for the two buttons up there, and I'm excited. All right, final piece of the puzzle for me on the Type M install here, and that is mounting the buttons. So this is going to be a trick little process here. The kit includes, of course, the billet aluminum kind of button housing, and this drills and taps straight onto the bar. I don't know if you can see, but it is curved right here, so it fits nice and flush. It's a very clean setup. Now, the idea is that you drill a couple holes. You're going to drill and tap this side. The screw is provided. So the button guide, the drill guide here, so you can actually put this and stick it straight on the bar, and then you have exactly where your center punches are going to be, and then you have the marked drill sizes and stuff like that. So all the information you need is here. I have a 9/64 bit and a 21/64 bit. You're going to need a center punch and a drill, of course. But the idea here is that we are going to run these wires internally through the bars. So I've made another video of actually making these handlebars, and I drilled some previous holes in there to make sure I can do the internal routing. I have seen other people go ahead and drill a hole on the other side of the bar where the wire just extends through and then runs outside of it. But for us, we're going to run it internally. Once we get this thing inside, we're going to use a little heat, and we're going to kind of just bend the wiring a little bit to make sure it stays nice and clean inside the bar and it doesn't have any harsh angles on it or a lot of force. But for now, I'm going to get started on this, and from what the instructions say, the mounting screw needs to be on the outside. Our right bar control is marked by green heat shrinks, so that's right here. Left bar control with yellow, so that'll give you kind of the orientation there and how to route these. So another thing is, on the right side, you'll notice the two green with white wires. That is for your front brake switch, so these will run outside and go to the actual brake switch on your control here, on your master cylinder. And then on the left side, these two brown wires are for your clutch safety switch, should you have one. So for me, I'm not going to run one on this, and we're just going to connect these together and we'll be good to go. Alright, so now I'm going to work on the right side first. So I'm going to take my scissors, kind of separate these. I know I have very limited room on my bar on the right side of this location, so I'm just going to cut this off. Put that on there. So let's go stick this on the bar. Alright, now for this, we obviously have our throttle housing already installed and spaced with the grip to the end of the bar. So we know our location. So for here, try to make this as comfortable as possible. I think that makes sense in that location. Very straightforward though. Try to get it as square as we can to the bar. Yep. I think that will be the most comfortable right there. We have our designated center punch. And then 9/64 works as a good pilot hole, so we're just going to use that, and that is the ultimate size we want for this side here, which is going to be for our mounting screw. Alright, now we have our 21/64 bit. Now, the important thing here is going to be to clean the inside of this hole the best you can. Now, I have this tool because I do a lot of fabrication. This is a deburring tool. So, if you don't have this, you definitely want to take some time here and work on cleaning out the inner edge, basically, because what happens is the wire can run inside, and with vibration it can run against any sharp edge and cause a short. So that'll cause the button to not work and just everything to be kind of haywire, and you want to try to avoid that. So do your best, take some extra time here, and take some extra time beyond that to make sure you get this as clean and smooth as possible. Now I've mentioned the deburring. I'm going to go ahead and use my Dremel here and just work on that inside radius. So then on the right side here we have our pilot hole. This is going to be an M4 tap. So now we can go ahead and start tapping our thread. Alright, simple enough. Alright, now we can go ahead and duplicate what we've done on the right to the left side here. Now to do that, of course, you need to have everything mocked up. Now, I don't want to put on my grip permanently because I still have to do the lever and stuff like that, but I need to determine the placement of stuff, so I'm just using any kind of depth gauge you can get, measuring how far the grip will be on, transfer that to the bar, mark it, and then you at least have a baseline to go from. We're going to take our template and try to match the exact angle of this. That way everything is the same. So give it a little space off the grip, and then our lever will go right after that. And because I've shown you guys the process of doing the right side, I'll go ahead and skip past the left, and we'll reconvene whenever this is done. We'll start routing wire. Alright, well, we have the bars drilled. I've taken the Dremel and deburred everything, and then I just took the air compressor and just worked on forcing air through every direction here and getting all of the shavings out of this. So now it's time to start running our cables. It's going to be a little bit of a process, but it's worth it in the end for how clean this looks. So let me show you how I'm going to do it. Now we have our two holes up top through which the wires are going to pass through, and when I made these handlebars, I left a big relief on only this side. So we're going to run both sides down through this one pedestal, and then we have one exit point down here. Now, because I want to feed the wires in this way, I need to route some safety wire through here, and then we're going to use this to tie onto and draw it back through. We're going to cut plenty of extra here. We'll just put like a little bend on the end, and hopefully that will pick a side. That is proving difficult. Let me reassess. Well, to my disbelief, usually safety wire has worked every time for me, but I guess it's more like the anchor, man. You know, 60% of the time it works every time. But no, I just fed in a piece of just regular wire. It fell right through that hole, so now I just gotta grab it. But we're gonna use safety wire for that. Alright, so there's that piece. Now we just gotta do it again. That was super easy. Put a little bend in the end of the wire, and then just fed it through where I know it was angled down, and went boop, fell right in. Oh, look at that. Okay. I'm learning stuff today too, guys. Usually it does not go, usually it's the opposite. Usually it's easy with this and hard with that, but no problem. I guess the lesson here is just to try whatever you have available to you. Obviously a thinner gauge wire is going to work better for this, but turns out the safety wire is just a little too stiff. Now that is a stainless 041 wire, and I do have, I did have some thinner stuff that might have worked better, but yeah, I've never had a problem using that in the past, and I guess that bend was just a little bit too severe, whereas this could easily kind of flex and make that bend. Alright, so this is our left side, and again, these are clutch safety wires, and what I'm going to do is do a simple, just simply loop them. That way it's seeing ground basically, it has continuity tied into the rest of the circuit, and then from there we'll just feed all of this in. So what we'll do is we'll tie this end to here, and then you just drag it through. Alright, let's go ahead and get this ran in here. Now, I just went ahead and did a solder joint on this. I actually made a video on my soldering method, so if you want, click above, there'll be a link there. So I want to pull this through, and these come with a little bit of heat shrink on the end, so I'm going to kind of fan that out, put a larger piece of heat shrink over it, put this through there, make a little hook, and then slide our heat shrink over. Now this is reasonably locked in place, so we shouldn't have too much difficulty. Now the important part is the way we do this. We want to kind of push in on this side and pull down here. And the reason I'm kind of pushing here is to make sure I don't drag the wire along any sharp edges on the hole that we've made. But of course we did take time to clean that off, so we shouldn't have any, but it's best to use precaution. Alright, so now I can feel it's right at that bend right there. Past it, okay. Alright. So, taking our time because we're going past 3 different kind of tight bends. So we have this one, and now this one. It's just best we take our time. Now of course we're going to have a bend right here, so I'm just going to relax this with the heat gun. Clean. I'm gonna come back and I will put some thread lock on this, but for now I just want to get this on here. Okay, now we have to install this side, and a little bit of an added complication here. The front brake switch wires, you do have to drill one more hole in the front, and I've just got safety wire this time, ran through that. But we're going to start feeding this in first. Whew! Alright, just got these through there. I didn't really show how to do it because that was just tricky, you know. Don't really have an exact method. I got one through with safety wire, and then the other I had to just kind of feed through and feed to that point and get a pick on it. for a little added protection. Putting some heat shrink right in here. And then once this is on there, I'm just going to loop it and go straight back to these little terminals. Okay, last piece of the puzzle, we have our controls, our two buttons ran. It's ran into my tray here. And then on the end of this, they come with a little piece of heat shrink over the terminals, and we need to put our connector on. Now there's a page in the instruction manual shown here that has the exact pinouts. So we want to make sure we get this thing wired up. Now I've already done one side. We're going to do the other here, so just get this heat shrink off. Alright, we have 3 wires per side. Black, red, and yellow. I've already done one side, and I've shown you on removing that purple wire there is a tang on here. And we want to make sure that tang is on the upward side where the little relief is here. And then they go in the orientation of black, yellow, red. Get this spun the right way. Tab side up. Hear a click. And these are a 8-pin, so the top left is black. We skip one, and the next one, the top row, the third position, is yellow. And then we have our red. Just like that. Now when plugging these in and unplugging them, you want to make sure you don't pull by the wire. You can run the risk of pulling these things out. They're very, very small terminals. It's not like these things have to read a lot of current or anything like that, so they don't need to be big. But you want to make sure that you pull by the actual connector. If you got to take a screwdriver or something and kind of pry to get these out, that's cool too. And now we can plug these things in. So on top of the connector here, there's actually a little bit of a color mark, so we got yellow and green, so you can't really screw it up. So just plug them in where they need to go. And that's it. X21 installed. Well, with the controls plugged in and the front brake switch wired up, this thing is ready to test. But before we do that, remember, we do not have a main fuse in it. There's no power to the system. And before we ever put power to it, we want to do a visual inspection across the whole bike, what's called like a nut and bolt when it comes to building something. We're going to comb through everything. We're going to review our work and make sure there's no apparent issues, and just kind of do like a mental refresh before we put power to this thing and test it out for the first time. Now, one last thing for this bike, I've mentioned the negative shutdown here on the back of the X21. I'm going to go ahead and flick that thing. So if this was a Type S or a Type P or whatever, you want to make sure that you have the ignition in the off position because you don't want to overheat your coil. So that's another thing. You can always disconnect your coil if you want, but when a bike's not running and you have the ignition on, you run the risk of overheating it. So anyway, I'm going to do that visual check. I will flick that little switch and then we'll be right back with you. See that catch? Alright, we are ready. So now I need to install the main fuse. Got to make sure the key is in the off position, and then we're going to go from there. So once I put the main fuse in, we'll put the key in, put it to the first on position. Then we're going to follow the sequence that's written out in the installation manual. That's going to take you through exactly how the functions work, and we'll have some fun with it. So Let me get this installed here. Our battery is hooked up, we knew that. Main fuse in. No explosions. Alright, key on, and this should flash 3 times. Alright, there's our tail light. That's super bright. That works. Headlights on. Alright, we're going to hit the left button twice. That goes to high beam. Twice again. Back to low beam. Tap both at the same time. And that has our hazards. And then on the back of the unit here, there's your flash pattern adjust. So I'm going to rotate that to my liking. And this is going to change basically the off time for the light itself. Go back the other way. That looks about good to me. That's exactly where it was set from the factory. Alright, we're going to hold the left button. Hopefully the horn comes on. I don't know if this horn's any good. Oh, that is the loudest horn I have ever heard. Oh my god. Alright. Hold both, or tap both buttons at the same time again. Hazards off. Tap the right turn signal, tap it again, turns it off, repeat for the left, turn signal comes on, tap it again, and it's off. Now if this was an electric start bike, we would do a sequence on the left button to turn the ignition on and off, and then from there we would just hold the button and that would crank it over, but I can't demonstrate that obviously because this is a kick only bike, but it worked great. One thing I forgot to mention was the headlight on-off feature. This one doesn't stay on all the time if you don't want it to, so tap the left button 3 times. Headlight goes off, and we just tap it 3 times again. Headlight comes on, and did you notice how it slowly came on? And that is on purpose. Now what that's for is actually lights like this with an older filament style bulb, and that's a soft start feature. And that's designed to slowly bring the current into the bulb, that way you're not hitting it with a bunch of voltage all at once and it doesn't burn that light out. So this is something that's built in specifically for like older lights and stuff like that. Like my CB750, it's got an old school type bulb in it, and this feature here will keep it alive. Now if you want more on the operation of the X21 Type M, I do have a separate video of this bike, of just the operation, exactly how you control every button, that kind of thing. And you guys can check that out in the next video or just linked above here. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, just let us know. Alright, that's going to conclude this one. The X21 Type M, 2 single momentary buttons on this thing. The installation is going to be the same whether it be an X21 M, S, or P. The premise is the same, and basically all you're changing is the control style here, and that's just a plug and play type thing. Now I know this video is really long, but my mission was to pack it with as much information as possible and not skip over a single thing. So I knocked this bike out in probably 3 days, and I go above and beyond. I know I'm kind of insane with all the detail and I overthink all the routing and stuff like that, so if you guys are going to tackle this project, I promise you can probably get it done in a weekend. So don't feel overwhelmed with it, but again, as I said in the beginning, if you do, just walk away, take some time, come back to it. That's okay, that's totally normal. And ask questions. So hopefully you guys found this very informative, but if you do have questions, if you do need to reach out, feel free to do so, and we'll be here to get right back to you. But yeah, hopefully you guys like this one. Get rid of your stock harness. Get something clean like the X21. So anyway, hope you guys like this one. Hope to see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.